Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have a chilling collection of scary stories from the middle of nowhere for you to enjoy. And if you'd like even more creepy content, you can follow me over on Patreon. And if you use code GHOST, you can get 70% off until the end of December 12th. I actually just launched some Colombian witch stories over there and they are so creepy. It would be really good if you wanted to check it out. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Around 30 years ago, my dad purchased 18 acres of property in southeastern Ohio, right about where Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia meet. Think north/north central Appalachia. When my father bought the land, it was a retired strip mine. Before that, it had butted up against a Civil War site, and before that, it fell along a prominent trade route for the Wyandot, Mingo, and Delaware tribes. By the time the acreage came into my family's possession, it was scrubby, depleted, and full of crumbling shale. My dad, an avid outdoorsman, intended to turn the old strip mine around to use for camping, hunting, and fishing. He and my grandfather stocked the ponds left behind by the mines with fish, planted trees and grasses in the barren areas, and did their best to heal the land from the damage the mining did on it. 30 years later, the result is scrubby meadow over rolling hills with a power line in the middle and new growth forests on the north and south thirds of the property. My dad wanted to keep the property as wild and untouched as he possibly could, and construction on the property is very primitive. There's a small shack with a wood-burning stove, a fire pit, and a creaky old outhouse that haunts my nightmares, and a rifle range. There's no electricity, no running water, and barely any cell service, and you can bet your ass no internet. As soon as it was purchased, my family began camping on the land about every weekend. You could say I grew up there, despite the land being over an hour away from our home. It sounds amazing, until you realize that you are in fact not a fan of fishing, hunting, marksmanship, or roughing it in tents. That's right, I grew up in an outdoor paradise but decided to be a more indoorsy type of child. I cried the first time I caught a fish because I was afraid I had hurt it, and I never had the heart to actually hunt an animal. While everyone was fishing or riding ATVs, I chose to wander the property by myself, to find a nice spot in the sun to set up my camp chair and read. It was during these times of solitude on the property that I noticed something with the land was not quite right. My earliest memory of strange happenings on the land happened when I was around 12 years old. I'd been hanging out around the camp while the rest of my family were doing whatever it is outdoorsy people do, when I decided to take a walk to one of the less frequented ponds on the property. The route there led through a meadow with grass almost as tall as I was. As the pond got closer, I saw a pretty thick stand of evergreens and deciduous trees. As I reached the tree line, I heard what sounded like the heavy panting of a dog behind me. At first, I wasn't concerned, because my family has always had several dogs. I turned around, content to have a companion with me, and spotted our old beagle, Raccoon, out of the corner of my eye. The thing is, Raccoon had passed away the previous winter, and his eyes weren't the same. They were vaguely human, and looking at me in a way that I can only describe as knowing. I was thoroughly on edge, but when I turned my head, that thing that looked like Raccoon was gone. Not wanting to turn around in the direction of that thing, I pushed onto the pond where, thankfully, I found my dad fishing by himself. I told him what had happened, and he smiled and said, "Sometimes the woods play tricks on you like that." Something similar happened a few years ago when I was watching our Rottweiler puppy, Titan, at the camp by myself. Titan and I were sitting by the fire. I was lost in my book when a dog appeared suddenly. Titan, even though just a puppy, was super protective, but the presence of this dog made him cling to me and hide. The dog was like none I'd ever seen before. It moved in complete silence, even when walking over the woodpile. Its eyes were the most piercing blue I'd ever seen on a husky. They almost glowed. When I looked at it, the dog made the most intense, unbroken eye contact I have ever gotten from any animal, and I had the distinct feeling that Titan and I were in danger. I scooped him up and ran to my dad's truck, locking us inside until well after the dog left, and my family returned to camp. I don't know why whatever presence was there chose to present itself to me as a dog, but my experiences on my dad's land are nothing compared to the recent events my dad and brother have experienced, and this is where my story gets really creepy. Fast forward to the autumn of 2023. My dad and brother were visiting the property just about every weekend for hunting, when, early on, they arrived at the shack, only to notice the bodies of small animals strewn in a circle, and the scent of decay overbearing. The shack looked like something large had raked its claws up and down the sides. Assuming this was the work of a badger, bobcat, or even a black bear, my brother purchased trail cams and placed them around the shack. It didn't take long for him to spot a red fox emerging from under the shack with a dead snake in its mouth. Mystery solved. Until the next weekend, when my dad and brother arrived at the shack to find the fox centered on the concrete doorstep of the shack, with its face entirely ripped off. No other signs of the body having been eaten were found. Curious, my brother checked the trail cam pointed at the shack, but it had gone dead at some point the night before. Thinking someone had trespassed onto the property and killed the fox, he checked the cameras lining the trails that led to the shack, and they showed absolutely nothing. Wary of predators, my dad and brother set out on their own hunt. Now, anyone who has spent a significant amount of time in the woods knows that it can play tricks on your mind. My dad has told me stories ranging from bobcats climbing into his tree stand while he was hunting, to instances of the woods going dead silent, phantom winds, shadow figures drifted amongst the trees, and hearing his name shouted loud and clear, even though he was the only person around for 18 acres. One time, as he was in his tree stand around evening, he heard my grandpa, the same one who helped him work so hard on the land, say, "Hey bub," right over his shoulder. My dad, for a moment, thought it was his father coming to tell him that he'd been in the tree long enough and it was time to give up and try again the next day, until he remembered that my grandfather had passed 15 years prior. Hugely uncomfortable, he packed up and headed to camp. The next day, my brother and his friend arrived to join my dad's weekend of hunting. The three men set up blinds and tree stands at opposite ends of the acreage so as to not spoil each other's hunts. Around evening, my brother heard my dad yelling his name in a distressed voice. My brother was immediately put on edge because the area my dad's voice was coming from was not where his tree stand was. To be safe, my dad texted and asked my dad if he was okay and if he called his name. My dad responded that no, he had absolutely not yelled or even spoken my brother's name for fear of scaring off the deer. Very shortly after, my dad heard a growling sound like he had never heard before, and louder than any local predator should be able to make. When describing it, he said it was like someone with a massive speaker at full volume ran at him while playing a recording of a wolf snarling. Then, the sound just stopped, as if someone flipped a switch. Immediately after, he got a text from his brother saying that he would like to leave the property right then. Apparently at the same time, my brother and his friend heard the exact same sound like it was right next to them, even though all three men were on opposite sides of the property. Without bothering to take down their tree stands, the men packed up their camp and cut their hunt short to head home, thoroughly unsettled by whatever was mimicking my dad and growling at them that day. Ever persistent hunters, my dad and brother returned to the camp the following weekend. My brother, more curious than cautious, decided he was going to investigate the area of the property where my dad's voice had come from. This particular corner of the land was very seldom visited, as it butted up against the property line and there were no obvious deer trails in the area. When he explored the area, my brother found something no one else had ever found in almost 30 years of roaming the property. Graves. Almost a dozen of them, all perfectly square, lined up neatly and bordered by rocks. As soon as he laid his eyes on the graves, my brother knew this was not somewhere he was supposed to be. He turned tail and headed back to camp to tell my dad. Dad, not to be content with taking my brother's word for it, convinced my brother to take him to see the graves. He brought a metal detector along, because he is a middle-aged man, and of course all middle-aged men have metal detectors. Passing over the graves, there was no metallic indication, until he got to one grave that was further apart from the others. The metal detector went nuts. My family had debated calling a forensics team to investigate the graves, but ultimately decided not to, because the graves are very obviously over 100 years old. We don't go near the graves at all now. We contacted the town's historical society to see if there were any notable homesteads in the area, and it was confirmed that there in fact had been. We notified the local police department, who don't seem that concerned, so we decided to let the dead rest. Even the allure of historical artifacts have not tempted us to poke around the grave, given off by the metallic signatures. My family still uses the property for camping, fishing and hunting, and recreation, but things have been different lately. My dad has all but abandoned the hunting shack, preferring to camp in his camper down by the road. My brother's friend, who heard the horrible growling, refuses to go back there. And me? I know not to go wandering alone there ever again. In July of 2020, I went with my sister, a close friend, and his girlfriend, who was visiting from out of state, to spend a weekend in a bigger city. My sister and I lived in a tiny town at the time, so getting a hotel somewhere with more to do sounded great. On the drive up, we decided to leave later in the evening, because my sister and I had told them about a creepy spot nearby, about 45 minutes from the hotel. Since all four of us were into paranormal and weird places, we figured it would be a fun stop. The place is called the Devil's Trampling Ground in North Carolina. It's a roughly 40-foot barren circle in the middle of a forest where nothing grows. In all the times I've been there, I haven't seen any animals in that area. Maybe an ant or a beetle, but no birds, no squirrels or lizards. According to legend, the devil himself paces the circle nightly to contemplate evil deeds. People say items left in the circle often get moved or vanish by morning, and the visitors frequently lose their sense of direction on the trails, as if the path shifted around them. Others say they lose track of time, or whole chunks of memory. My sister and I had been twice during daylight. Both times felt a little off, but nothing frightening. Honestly, we found it calm and strangely peaceful to walk around, but we had never gone at night or stayed long enough for the light to fade out. Our friend, who is very analytical and extremely skeptical, specifically wanted to go between 2 to 3 a.m. for the best chance of seeing something, as he put it. I don't mind. I love paranormal stuff, and have had a few paranormal experiences before, so I was curious to see if the legends held up. The drive in there was already unsettling. It was a narrow 2-lane road through dense woods with no streetlights, and we kept hitting sudden patches of thick fog. It was mid-July, so it felt weirdly out of place, and instantly gave me a bad feeling, almost like a warning. Then Google Maps malfunctioned for no obvious reason, directing us to a random location about 5 minutes from the actual entrance. That had never happened during the 2 previous trips. My unease didn't go away. I felt like something wanted us misdirected. When we finally arrived, there was the usual gravel pull-off and the metal cattle gate blocking the path to the clearing. But the moment we stopped the car, I got a horrible sinking feeling in my core and instantly felt scared. My sister and our friend wanted to get out right away, but I told them to wait. We kept the doors locked, rolled down the windows and aimed our flashlights towards the entrance and the surrounding trees. None of us said anything for a bit. We all just listened. That's when we heard it. A low drumming or chanting noise coming from the woods off to one side of the path. We all heard it. And it happened multiple times, starting, stopping, then starting again. Sometimes it was faint, sometimes louder, but always rhythmic. It creeped all of us out, and we stayed silent, scanning the woods with the flashlight beams. From my point of view, things escalated suddenly. I pointed my flashlight towards the gate and felt like I physically couldn't look away, like something was holding my attention in place. At the same time, a thick fog began moving rapidly through the trees towards my car. Even though it moved fast, time itself felt slow and distorted. The fog looked slightly illuminated from behind, and I felt like I was slipping into some kind of trance. I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. I couldn't think clearly. In the fog, I saw a huge, dark shadow forming behind the gate. It didn't walk forward or appear all at once. It just slowly materialized into shape. It was large, tall and humanoid, but its lower half looked goat-like. I was terrified, but still unable to react or look anywhere else. I just stared at it, frozen. Suddenly I heard my friend's voice cutting through everything, first faint, then sharply louder, then a loud finger snap right next to me. "Go! Drive!" Before I could even think, my body reacted. I hit the gas and sped away. The hotel address was already in Google Maps, and I followed the route back for 45 minutes. I don't remember the drive at all. My next clear memory is being in the parking lot and then walking into our hotel room. Once we were inside, our friend said, "No one say anything. I know you all saw something. Write down what you experienced separately. Don't talk first." He said "you all," because without me realizing it, both his girlfriend and I had been acting exactly the same way at the trampling grounds. Afterwards, when we compared what we wrote, we had described nearly identical experiences. The fog, the shadow, the trance, almost word for word, with neither of us having spoken about it beforehand. But here's the strange part. My sister and our friend saw absolutely nothing. They only saw that the two of us were unresponsive and staring, not reacting to their voices or questions. They said we looked completely entranced. They tried to get our attention multiple times and got nothing from either of us until the snap. According to them, the entire event lasted around 10 minutes. I thought at least 30 to 45 minutes had passed. Our friend did have one visual experience though. While I was speeding away, he looked in the rearview mirror and saw bright yellow car headlights right behind us. He turned around to check, expecting to see a car on the road, but there was nothing there at all, just total darkness. When he looked in the mirror again, the headlights were still there. He's a skeptic, so seeing something he couldn't logically explain genuinely shook him. After that night, we didn't talk about it again. We just moved on as if it had never happened. But I think about it constantly. I've had nightmares and sometimes I get that same sinking feeling out of nowhere. I did go back once during the day to return a rock I had taken on a previous visit. I didn't want anything from that place in my home. I carried protection with me, but when I got back to my car, I realized one of my earrings was missing. They were clasped hoops, the kind that shouldn't slip off easily. I searched everywhere and never found it, and left immediately. I've held on to this for years, but lately I felt like the need to finally share it, as it's one of the most terrifying experiences of my life, and I feel like it changed me in a permanent way. For some background, I don't live in Missouri anymore. I currently live in Mississippi, but I still have several friends up north in Missouri that I occasionally go camping with. These two incidents happened about 2 years apart, both in Missouri, and funnily enough, one of my friends happened to be present for both of them. The first incident happened somewhere outside the town of Ozark. I don't remember the exact location, but we took Highway 14 and Highway 125 out of Ozark, and it took roughly 20 minutes to reach the site from the Walmart in Ozark where we had met up. It was me, a couple of friends who came with me from Mississippi, 3 of our mutual friends who lived locally, and one of their border collies. This wasn't a designated campsite at all. It was just a hidden spot off the road, down a narrow, steep trail that dropped into a valley with a creek running through it. One of my local friends who liked scouting out remote places for bouldering and rock climbing had found it years earlier. His family knew the area well, so he was familiar with every little curve in the landscape. We parked on the shoulder off the road at a gated private use drive, grabbed our gear, and made several round trips down the trail to the cliff overhang where we planned to sleep. It was a beautiful little spot that opened towards the valley. We spent the day bouldering on the opposite side of the creek, hiked back around sundown, built a fire, cooked and relaxed. At one point during our conversation, we heard a strange animal call echoing across the valley. It only ever sounded when someone was mid-sentence, so no one heard it clearly, but we all noticed it at the same time. It was weird enough that we fell silent to listen, but of course it never happened again and we shrugged it off. By around 9:30 p.m, the fire had died down, and drizzle had soaked all the nearby wood. We had extra firewood, snacks and water in the car, so we made several more trips up and down the hill to restock. After our final run back from the cars, things took a turn. I set my load down and added wood to the fire. As I sat down, a flashlight beam appeared on the trail. At first, I assumed it was one of our group who'd fallen behind, until I turned and saw all of my friends standing behind me, each setting down their own gear. Then a man stepped into the firelight. He looked like a drifter in his 60s, with long hair, long beard, and filthy clothes. One of my friends called out asking who he was, but the man didn't answer. He simply stepped closer. Another friend approached and asked again, and the man finally told us he was a neighbor. We asked if we needed to leave, honestly assuming this overhang might be his sleeping spot, but he said no. He claimed he was out looking for arrowheads and that he used to find plenty around the same area where we camped. He told us not to mind him, then headed straight down the slope towards the creek. This incline was steep. Trees, bushes, jagged rocks, and even a small runoff stream cutting through it. I wouldn't attempt it in daylight without being careful. Watching a man around 70 years old do it at night with only a flashlight was bizarre, but he moved like he knew the terrain well. We kept eyes on him until he faded into the dark, even though none of us felt physically threatened. We were 6 guys with 3 hatchets and a machete. It was unsettling that he appeared out of nowhere in such a remote area. We eventually decided to leave before sleeping, just in case he circled back. It took us about 30 minutes and several more hauls to move our essentials back to the cars, and as we neared the road we heard the man, who by then would have been at the creek making wolf calls. Not some supernatural howl, just a human doing a wolf imitation, but still creepy. Right as we finished loading our car, the 3 friends parked in front of us suddenly yelled, "We need to go now." They drove into their vehicle, We scrambled into ours and peeled out. We drove all the way back to the Walmart in Ozark before stopping to talk about what happened. They said they had seen another person with a flashlight coming towards our car while we were loading. This was across the road and uphill from the campsite, the complete opposite direction from where the old man had gone. There was no realistic way for him to loop around the valley and reach that point without us noticing. He would have to climb rocks, skirt the highway, or backtrack for well over an hour. Looking back, I'm convinced the man was howling to signal someone else across the road. That meant there were at least 2 people out there, maybe more, roaming around in the darkness. This happened east of the town of Ozark, literally somewhere between the communities of Oldfield and Keltner. The second incident is far more mundane, but still strange. I was camping with a different group of friends, except for the one guy who had seen the second flashlight in the first story. We were staying at Bennett Springs Campground outside of the town of Lebanon, doing some late-night fishing along the river near the campsite. The campgrounds were behind us, while across the river was nothing but thick forest. While we were talking, we noticed a light in the trees on the opposite side of the river. At first, I assumed it was someone walking with a flashlight, until I realized it was far too high off the ground to be held by a person. Then, I wondered if it was a street lamp or a building light, but there are no roads or structures across from that stretch of river. It definitely wasn't a vehicle headlight. We watched the light hover among the trees for a while before it vanished. It wasn't frightening, just odd. I never figured out what it was until later, when I heard about the spook light, which is also located in Missouri. What we saw sounded eerily similar. If anyone has any local knowledge or insight about these stories or strange things happening in the areas of the Missouri Ozarks, I'd love to hear about them. I'm convinced there's a lot happening in these woods that most people never get to hear about. It's been many years since this happened, but the memory is still sharp in my mind. I used to live in an old farmhouse out in the middle of nowhere, with no neighbors for what felt like miles. Just empty fields and woods pressing in on all sides. I always suspected the house was haunted, and I wasn't the only one. Family members, friends, local people who visited, veterinarians who came to the property, even previous owners, all of them had seen or heard things that none of us could ever cleanly explain. But those are entirely different stories. This one happened on a night when 2 friends of mine were staying over, a couple I'll call Victoria and John. We divided the sleeping arrangements like this. Victoria took my daughter's bedroom, which was at the far end of the upstairs hallway, opposite the staircase. My daughter and I slept in the master bedroom. My 2 youngest kids were in their own room in their cribs across the hall. My husband and John had fallen asleep downstairs on the couch earlier that evening and were essentially out for the night. For reasons I can't quite explain, that was the only night I ever closed every single bedroom door in the entire house. Later, as I lay in bed, the house settling into that deep silence, I heard footsteps. At first, I didn't think much of it. My kids were either in their cribs or next to me, and that left my husband or John. But the footsteps weren't coming from the direction of the stairs. They started at Victoria's end of the hallway. That should have been impossible. Her room was at the farthest end of the hall, with no access except the hallway itself. If anyone had come from downstairs, they would have had to walk past my door first, and I would have heard both the stairs and her bedroom door opening. But the footsteps started directly outside her room, slow and steady, moving down the hallway towards me, stopping outside my door, then turning around. They walked all the way back to Victoria's room and then just stopped. Not another sound, no creaking floorboards, no retreat back down the stairs, nothing. Again, that should have been impossible. The old farmhouse floors were so loud you could hear someone cross a room from outside the house. In the morning, while we were getting coffee and trying to shake off sleep, I casually asked Victoria if she had heard anything during the night, and her whole expression changed. She looked genuinely shaken, almost relieved that I'd said something first. She told me she had heard footsteps outside her door clear as day, and had lain there frozen staring at the doorknob, terrified it was about to turn and open. That was the last time I ever shut all the bedroom doors in the house, and I never heard those footsteps again. My best guess, whatever usually moved through the halls each night, found every door closed for the first time and didn't know where to go, or what to do. I still have no idea what it was, only that it wasn't one of us. 13 years ago, I camped deep in the Bornean jungle on land once used by headhunters. Our guides warned us right away that these grounds were considered haunted by the local communities, and that we should be especially respectful while staying there. I didn't put much stock in it at the time, but the way they said it sort of stuck with me. That night I was lying in my hammock when something odd happened. I remember waking up to the sound of movement, quiet at first and then more distinct. One by one, every single person in our group, about a dozen of us, climbed out their hammocks and walked towards the fire pit. I glanced at my digital watch to check the time, but the screen was flashing 12 like it had reset itself. That didn't make sense. The watch had never malfunctioned before. Still half asleep, I told myself it was nothing, that maybe everyone was up for some reason I didn't understand, and I figured maybe someone would wake me if I was oversleeping, and so I let myself drift off again. The next time my eyes opened, it was morning. Bright daylight. Birds calling. Every single person was back in their hammocks exactly where they had been before, and my watch was still flashing 12. Over breakfast, I mentioned what I thought I'd seen. Everyone immediately dismissed it, insisting I must have been dreaming. I almost accepted that, until one of the guys spoke up too. He rarely talked unless necessary, and hated being the focus of attention, but he said he saw it too. According to him, around 1 a.m. the entire group had gotten up and walked to the fire pit silent and in unison. Exactly what I remembered. After we left that campsite, my watch never reset like that again, not once, and it worked perfectly for years after. The idea that it could have been some sort of mass sleepwalking or even a group hallucination honestly unsettles me more than any ghost story. The possibility of a mass possession on former headhunter grounds? Well, that thought has stuck with me all this time. The only mundane explanation I can come up with is that maybe I really was dreaming, and the quiet guy decided for some reason to lie. But that was so incredibly out of character for him that it doesn't fit. If anyone has experienced anything similar in the jungles of Malaysia, Borneo, or anywhere else with heavy history and isolation, I genuinely would like to hear your story. Oh, and I'm open to possible explanations or theories, because I still can't make sense of what happened that night. Back in 2016, I worked at a summer camp in Colorado. Some of the other counselors decided to spend one of our weekends off in Denver and thought it would be fun to take the high-powered handheld radios with us so we could use them around the city. Making our way from the camp, we split into 2 cars, me driving my truck with my best friend and 2 others in their car. We were messaging back and forth with the radios as we went down the road. We were just outside a town near the camp in a bit of a valley that turns into a big, tight canyon, when over the radio we start hearing screaming. It sounded like a woman's voice yelling, "Help! Oh my God, help!" But it was very static-ish. I remember me and my friend looking at each other. Then she activated the radio and said to the other car, "Did you guys hear that?" They replied that they had, and the 2 not driving sent radio messages asking if someone needed help, and if they could hear us. We heard the screaming one more, but she didn't seem to be able to hear us. We pulled to the side of the road with our friends and decided to drive back up the road a bit to see if we heard it again, but we never did. I hope whoever she was, she got the help she was looking for. About 4 years ago, I was out in the middle of nowhere with my friend Marcos. A rare comet was supposed to be visible that night, so we drove out to this remote dirt road surrounded by huge stretches of ranch land. Out there, you can go miles without seeing a single house or street light. It's pitch black and dead quiet, perfect for sky watching. We parked, turned off the car, and stepped out to get a better look at the sky. But the second my feet hit the ground, something felt off. I got this uneasy feeling like the whole area had gone quiet, and I told Marcos I didn't like it. He didn't notice anything weird, but he agreed to leave. He started turning the car around, and as the headlights swung across the brush, I saw something sprint across the road. It was so fast I almost doubted what I'd seen, except the details are burned into my memory. The thing was huge and flesh-colored, running from one bush to another in this bizarre, crouched, almost human-like position. But it wasn't human. The limbs were too long and the movement too unnatural, like it was trying to mimic a person but couldn't quite get the shape right. Definitely not any animal I'd heard of, and way too big to be someone messing around there in the middle of nowhere. I only saw it for a split second. "Did you see that?" I yelled. But Marcos had been looking over his shoulder while reversing and missed the whole thing. We got out of there fast, and the whole drive back I kept looking in the mirrors, half expecting it to have been following us. I still think about that now. The comet was the reason we went out there, but whatever I saw running across the road stuck with me. This happened to me when I was younger. It is a true story. I was maybe officially in my double digits, but still around the age where the only scary stuff you know and believe in are the cliché things, like zombies, vampires, werewolves, and the devil. I had, and still have, best friends who happened to be twins. We lived in New Jersey at the time, and I lived about 15 minutes away from their house. The area I lived in was nothing but houses, but they lived in the middle of nowhere. Woods, and more woods for ages, and naturally, we loved this. I'd met them in 3rd grade, and we started hanging out around 4th grade. Well, from the start, they told me about all the paranormal stuff that they claimed happened around their house. They were the first people who got me onto the spookier side of things, introduced me to YouTubers whose videos gave me the chills. From the start, they told me of a supposed satanist cult in their area. Now again, I wasn't a huge believer in ghosts or anything at that age, but it was interesting to hear about from 2 kids who very clearly were believers. Anyway, there is a field pretty close to their house, and about halfway down that field is a quarry. There's a gravel road, pit road is what we called it, that leads through the woods and down into the field so workers and trucks can come and go into the quarry. Well, just in the woods, maybe a short 5-minute walk from pit road, was a spot they called the Devil's Triangle. They never explained it, so I had no idea what it looked like, but they told me about it all the time. I always pictured some ritualistic table with skulls and candles and whatnot. Being a young kid, well, we talked about it, but we never went there. Until a year or so of hanging out, so sometime around 5th grade, they finally decided to take me there. So we made the short walk to the field, then along the tree line surrounding it, and eventually onto Put Road. We avoided the passing trucks as people, especially children, were not allowed back there. And eventually, they pointed and told me we needed to step off the trail and into the woods in order to continue. The second, and I mean the exact second my foot hit the grass and leaves off the trail, it hit me. The burning, spine-tingling sensation of being watched, of eyes burning in the back of your neck. It was also accompanied by this horrendous butterfly feeling in my stomach, like any second I would throw up. I kept quiet. I didn't want to chicken out. They'd think I was a wimp. We carried on, and eventually I saw it. Nothing. Nothing at all, until we stepped closer. I can only describe it as a crater in the ground, a random 8-foot deep circle, probably some 30 to 40 feet in diameter. But the odd thing about it was the fact that the center of the crater was raised, level with the ground outside it, and in that center was an old fold-out table. I say old, it could have been only a year old, but the weather had made it look nasty and worn, and it was almost snapped in two. That was it. The Devil's Triangle. Well, it was more of a Devil's Donut. This is where they pointed out the triangle aspect. There were 3 trees, the only signs of life in the forest filled with it. 3 trees on the outer edges of the crater. They just so happened to form a triangle around it. Moving on from the description, we stood at the edge of it, not really wanting to step in, considering it was supposedly evil. But the youngest of the twins decided we should, and so we did. When I said chills were constantly going down the back of my spine as we walked in the woods, they only intensified 100-fold as we stepped down into the triangle itself. And then I remember nothing. Absolutely nothing. One of the twins stayed close, seeing that I had been getting paler the whole walk in the triangle. But he did explore. We separated, all staying in the triangle, just not side by side, and after about 5 minutes, when one of them looked at me, he said I was looking around and I was blank-faced. Said I looked really bored. He called out to me, and I told him to come over here, and so he did. And the second he stood beside me, one of those 3 trees fell. A perfectly healthy, intact, living, quite large tree collapsed, exactly where he was standing 3 seconds ago. He looked over, asked what happened, and his brother responded and explained the situation. Then he asked, "Why did you call me over?" "I knew," I said. They asked me what I meant when I said I knew, before I suggested we leave. So we ran, and after 5 minutes of running they said we stopped to catch our breath, and that's when my memory kicked in. I remember stopping to breathe, but that's it. I never remember going into the triangle. I don't remember calling to any of the twins, and I don't remember the tree falling. I don't even remember leaving the triangle and running. I only remember catching my breath, and then I was fine. Trying to play it off, trying to act like I hadn't just lost crucial moments of our lives. I asked them to repeat what happened to make sure I remember them correctly, and they did, word for word, and they both swore the same thing happened. And they still do to this day, but don't know that I don't remember it, that I have no idea what made me say or do those things. I don't know what to make of it. I don't want to say it was a demon that saved my friend, but it happened, and I can't remember a goddamn thing. Naturally, I haven't told many people about it because they'd assume I'm crazy, so I thought I'd share it with all of you, and see if anyone can enlighten me on what this could have been. I'd like to start by saying that I'm a skeptic by nature. I'm not sure what to make of all of this, but I can't really reconcile my beliefs with my experiences. Also, I'm telling this story because of what happened last night, but I have to start about 16 years ago, with my first experience on this road. I had a friend that experienced weird, unexplained, or otherwise spooky things all the time. It's something that happened her entire life, and the entire time that I knew her. Because of that, she was interested in the paranormal, and the interest rubbed off on me, I guess. Though, as I mentioned, I'm skeptical. Her and I used to take long drives in the country at night down spooky roads. We called it our ghost drives, though nothing ever really happened on those drives other than us working each other up with ghost stories. One road that we especially liked going down was River Road. It was several miles out of town and winds along a river. Everything about this road feels right out of a horror movie. It's narrow, run-down, curvy, and there's a long stretch of the road that's forested on both sides with a tree canopy over the road before it opens into fields on one side. The trees press especially close in that canopied area. Not to mention there are several curves in that road that are so sharp you have to nearly stop the car to go around them. So the first experience was around 09. Her and I were driving down that road at night, as we often did, but this time she was getting an especially bad feeling. As I said, she's sensitive to this sort of thing, and I trusted her bad feeling when this happened. At first it was mild, but within a few minutes she was having a borderline panic attack. She told me I needed to turn around right now. I pulled into the first driveway. I go back the other way, and it was that house that seemed to be the source of her panic. She was screaming and crying as I tried to get out of the driveway as fast as possible. The house itself was especially spooky looking, clearly abandoned for years. Broken windows, faded paint, rotting out truck on the lawn, etc. She felt like we were being watched from the house, though I admittedly didn't feel anything at the time. I got us turned around, and her panic eased the further we got from the house. The rest of the drive home was fairly calm but tense. The next day she was feeling a bit braver in the daylight and wanted to go back to the house, so we drove out there. But as we approached, everything was different. The house was now normal. No broken windows. The side on the house was a clean sky blue. The truck in the driveway looked fairly new as well. This was a normal occupied house. We drove up and down that part of the road a few times to make sure we didn't miss anything, but we were both confident that was definitely the right house. The paint color was the same, though obviously newer looking. It had the same wraparound front porch and a barn/garage in the back. It was the house, just newer looking. For years her and I talked about that and we could never explain it. I think that was the last time the both of us went down that road together. So now to last night's experience. A friend of mine texted me at 10 p.m. to ask if I wanted to drive out into the country and get pictures of the northern lights. We'd both missed it the night before, and that was supposed to be the last night it was visible in our area. I picked her up, and we went out to the middle of nowhere. I parked next to a cornfield, and we took pictures of the sky for a while. Nothing spooky happened, but we got some good pictures. I joked a few times about the eeriness of the empty country and started to tell a few stories of things that had happened, but she asked me not to until we got back into the car. Around 12:30 a.m., we got back to the car and I proceeded to tell her about the drive down River Road back in the day. She was really interested and asked if we could drive down it. Enough time had passed for me that the creepiness had mostly faded, so I agreed. It was a little out of the way, but a spooky drive seemed like it would be fun. It was a little after 1 a.m. when we pulled onto the road. Her immediate reaction was like, "Ooh, I can see why you guys like driving down here." Last time I was on the road with my other friend, it was mostly her that was freaking out. I usually didn't get the bad vibes, but last night I started feeling it right away. We drove through the creepy canopy part of the road and the part with the sharp turns. I was properly nervous, but I wasn't downright scared. Once we got through that area, I said, "That's really the worst of it. The road gets more developed once we get further down." She responded, "No, it looks pretty creepy up ahead too." That's when I realized she was right. There was another canopy of trees ahead, and the woods pressed really close to the road in that area. This was weird to me, because the last time I'd been down the road, that area was only wooded on this side of the river. Cornfields and farmhouses should have been on the other side, but that's not what we saw. We kept going. The woods seemed to get thicker as we went. There were a few houses in the trees at first, but then they all went away too. It was just woods and winding narrow roads. Every so often there'd be a break in the trees and an old run-down house or something, but mostly woods. And the wildlife was odd. I've lived in this part of the state for my entire life. We get deer pretty heavily this time of year, but nothing like I saw last night. Deer were absolutely everywhere. I don't know how many times I've had to stop the deer to cross. A raccoon or weasel. And for every time I saw a deer, there were many more where we just saw the eyes through the trees. It was absolutely bizarre how many animals there were. The road continued for much longer than I remembered from the previous visit. I know it's been years since I've been down it, but I've probably been down that road 50 times in my life with my other friend, and nothing was familiar this time around. Before, there were a couple of curbs in that road that you had to slow down a lot for. This time, the road was absolutely full of spots like that. It was also much hillier than I recalled, not to mention the run-down bridge, creepy white fences half in the trees, and at least once a flash of light in the woods that we couldn't account for. The feeling I felt while driving down the road was like nothing I'd experienced. I had full-body goosebumps for most of the drive. I didn't understand what I was seeing. I won't say it felt like we were back in time or anything, though it did distinctly look like that at times. We finally reached the end of the road after what felt like forever. It ends on another county road that leads into a tiny town. I couldn't even begin to give a sense of how long we were on the road, because it didn't feel like time worked while we were on it. We both were even nervously joking that we'll get back to civilization and find a week has passed or something. Initially, we were going to go through the small town and get back to the freeway, but my friend wanted to go back the way we came. Keep in mind she'd never been down that road before, so while it was creepy to her, it wasn't as creepy as it was for me, having been familiar with what the road should look like. I agreed to back down the road, but mentioned to her that I feel like we got lucky making it our first time, and feel like now we were pushing our luck. But still, in we went. And this is when things take a turn for the bizarre. Not that anything weird happened the first time. In fact, nothing at all happened the first time, because the road was exactly like I'd always remembered it. A few tree canopy areas, a few tight turns, but mostly farmland and houses on the non-river side of the road. It was also fairly flat compared to the first drive. The animals were still dense, but not as much as the first trip down the road. One thing that stood out to me on the drive back were the lights in the windows of the houses. By now it was around 2 AM on a weeknight, and every house had lights on inside their house, as if every homeowner on River Road knew something wasn't right. By the time we made it back to the other side, my friend was also properly freaked out as well. The whole time we pointed out different areas that we knew weren't there during the first trip. There was even a branch on a tree that hung down lower over the road that we had to avoid on the first drive, and hadn't been there this time. The last thing I'll say is this. I've never had a creepy feeling about my apartment. It's a pretty new complex in the city right by a mall. Nothing you'd ever think about as haunted. But 4 to 5 times today, I've heard a random knocking sound coming from the other side of the place, and every time I check there's nothing there. And when I was in the kitchen earlier, the sound came from right behind me. I quickly turned around, but couldn't for the life of me figure out what had made the sound. I'm more than little concerned that I've brought something back with me. I guess time will tell. To add to the story, I've had 2 very strange instances since then that give me very distinct feelings that I'm not in the universe I started in. I'm a big The West Wing fan, and was absolutely certain Bradley Whitford from The West Wing had died in a car accident years ago. But now he's alive and well. Additionally, Judi Dench died a few months ago. It was huge news. but it turns out she's still alive and well. I'm not entirely sure what's going on. About a week ago, I was driving with two of my friends through the absolute middle of nowhere in Nebraska. It was close to 1 a.m., and we'd already been on the road for hours. The whole trip had a weird vibe, because my roommate kept joking that the drive was tainted with death, because we'd passed a disturbing amount of fresh roadkill. We'd even hit a bird earlier that afternoon, and it set the tone. But at around 1:30 a.m. things escalated. We hit two baby raccoons. There was no time to swerve, just two tiny shapes frozen in the headlights, and then two thumps. My roommates quickly moved their bodies off the road and into the grass, and we got back into the car without speaking, like talking about it would make the whole thing worse. Within a few miles, all three of us felt something change. And I don't mean like, oh, this is creepy. I mean an immediate visceral shift in the air. Like the oxygen got thin, the air got cold, and a feeling like we were being watched from the back seat. I've always been a little superstitious, but I have never felt a fear so pure and instinctive. It was like something had fixed its eyes on the back of our necks, waiting for us to make a wrong move. We all felt it at once. This overwhelming certainty that we could not stop the car for any reason, not if we broke down, not if someone got sick, not even if we hit something. Stopping felt like opening a door that we absolutely were not meant to open. The GPS didn't help. A little further down the highway, it tried rerouting us down a square gravel road, one of those weird farm loops bordered by fields and a single flickering lamppost at the entrance. As soon as our headlights swept over the lamppost, all three of us said, absolutely not. The feeling that radiated off that road was like static electricity and malice rolled together. None of us would cross that threshold. Instead, we made a frantic, adrenaline-fueled U-turn right there on the highway just to avoid passing it. The dread followed us for the rest of the drive. It didn't fade, it just sat there, like something invisible, sitting in the car with us, the uninvited passenger. And there it stayed until we pulled into our motel at 3 a.m. Even then it took hours before the feeling fully drained away, and I didn't feel normal until 6 a.m. When we got home, we held a little ceremony for the animals that we'd hit, the bird and the raccoons, just to acknowledge it, because the whole ride felt like more than a coincidence. And this might sound like a stretch. The day after we had those conversations about how none of us felt like the night in Nebraska had been the end of whatever was following us, my roommates suddenly ended up in the hospital with bizarre symptoms. Their blood pressure had dropped to something terrifyingly low, like 60/33. They only stabilized after several hours of fluid and monitoring. So now we're all sitting here like, what the actual hell happened to us? I don't even know what to look up. Nothing about these experiences was concrete, just a wave of fear and consequences. Could it have been bad luck? Perhaps. And to top it all off, we have to drive back through Nebraska in a few days' time. Nothing ominous about that at all. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed these stories. I certainly enjoyed narrating them for you, and any feedback or comments would be very much appreciated. Again, if you'd like to get 70% off Patreon, you've got a few more days to use code GHOST to get 70% off. A huge thanks, as always, to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen for your very appreciated support. But that's it from me. I hope you guys have a great night, and I hopefully should see you tomorrow, where I'm going to be bringing you some haunted house stories. So until next time, stay awesome, and good night.